Chapter 07. D. Vicky.Golden.Bear. This is an interview with Vicky Golden Bear from the 1979 Arizona Rainbow Gathering, recounting her life from childhood through her experiences with the Rainbow family. Born in 1957 in California, she grew up in a turbulent household marked by her father's alcoholism and abuse, later countered by his turn to religion. Initially deeply involved in Pentecostal church life, she shifted as a teenager into drugs, music, and countercultural living. By her mid-teens, she was involved in relationships, communal living, and frequent drug use, including LSD and peyote. She left school, hitchhiked extensively across the U.S. and Mexico, and became part of the Rainbow Gathering culture beginning in 1974. Vicky describes arrests, psychedelic experiences, communal farms, unstable relationships, pregnancies, miscarriages, and the birth of her daughter in 1977. Her narrative reflects cycles of drifting between partners, spiritual experimentation, survival jobs, and attempts at stability. By 1979, she had separated from her partner Billy Sean and was continuing to move within Rainbow circles. Later notes mention that by 1985, she married fellow Rainbow member Phil Coyote, and together they ran a childcare center in Nevada. Chapter 07. E. Rebel. This interview records the life story of Rebel, born in 1963 in rural West Virginia, to an Apache father and German mother, who was placed in an orphanage at a young age with his siblings. He recalls a harsh childhood, violence, and early drug use, while forming a close bond with his brother Marty. Adopted at 16 by a Christian family, he was later accused of misconduct with their young daughter, which led him to leave under stigma and take on false identities. He joined the U.S. Navy Seabees, reuniting briefly with his mother, but heavy drug use, conflict with officers, imprisonment, and eventual expulsion followed. After hitchhiking, arrests, and continued drug dependence, Rebel discovered the Rainbow Gathering, initially attracted by the promise of free food and drugs. His skepticism shifted after experiencing the OM Circle, which he described as transformative, leading him to work in the communal kitchens, embrace service, and find peace and love in the Rainbow community, an experience that he says kind of changed him and convinced him to return every year. Chapter 07. F. Moon. Cricket. Moon Cricket recounts his life from a troubled family background, early departure from school, and struggles with work and identity, through songwriting, substance abuse, and even a period of Satan worship before being exorcised by a Baptist evangelist. He describes losing over 100 original songs, 2 suicide attempts, and estrangement from his children, but finding new hope through the Rainbow Gathering. At the 1982 Idaho Gathering, he recalls hardships such as freezing weather, illness, and severe food shortages, exacerbated by disputes with Michael John over supplies and the sale of the Rainbow Nation Guide. Conflicts with figures like Barry and Juan Bizarro led him to move camps, but he also worked constructively, helping to build the Hippie House Calls Medical Center. Despite tensions and his own missteps, he emphasizes his connection with Road Dogs and later joined the Imagination Caravan, a traveling group of performers, though that effort eventually dissolved. Chapter 08. A. Foxfire. Foxfire, born in 1934 to a Methodist preacher and a Quaker mother, describes a life shaped by pacifism, music, activism, and deep involvement with the Rainbow family, where he came to be known as the Anarch. After studying at Cornell and working as a musician and teacher, he embraced anti-war activism, supported draft resistors, and participated in the Quaker Vigil at the White House. His stories recount encounters with figures ranging from generals to John Lennon and Yoko Ono, experiences with peyote pilgrimages, jail time in Texas, nuclear safety hearings in Washington, and numerous Rainbow gatherings from 1973 onward. At these gatherings he observed both communal harmony and conflicts, mystical experiences like visions of a white buffalo, and tensions over hierarchy, food, and inclusion. He consistently upheld anarchist values, rejecting imposed authority and homogeneity, believing instead in free cooperation, spiritual energy, and mutual aid as the true basis of community life. Chapter 08. B. Gray Eagle. Gray Eagle, William Eugene Stevens, recounts a life shaped by hardship, resilience, activism, and community, beginning with a difficult childhood on the Texas plains during the Dust Bowl and Depression, early illnesses, and exposure to strict religion that fueled his questioning spirit. He describes youthful excesses with alcohol, drugs, and relationships, service in the Navy during World War II, and post-war struggles with family, farming, and railroading before turning to Alcoholics Anonymous and finding sobriety. In the 1960s and 70s, he became active in civil rights and peace movements, supporting freedom riders, joining the Dallas Peace Committee, and experiencing arrests and police violence. His life took a profound turn in 1975 when he encountered the Rainbow Family, where he found belonging, spirituality, and purpose through photography and participation in gatherings, which he credits with saving his sanity and shifting his attitude toward work and life. His narrative emphasizes mystical experiences, enduring friendships, and a commitment to peace and community, culminating in retirement at White Hawk Community near Dallas and continued involvement in rainbow gatherings. Chapter 08. C. Tisa. The life story of Tisha, born Teresa in 1938, recounts her journey from New York to Tennessee, through Vanderbilt and the Peace Corps in Tanzania, where she confronted American racism and embraced broader cultural perspectives. Returning to the U.S. in the late 1960s, she was swept into the turbulence of civil rights, anti-war movements, and women's liberation, eventually moving to San Francisco, where she embraced hippie culture, co-ops, crafts, and communal living. After building a life in Humboldt County, she became deeply involved in rainbow gatherings, starting with Wyoming in 1973, where she found profound community, spirituality, and purpose. Her experiences with the Rainbow Rider Bus Collective and various communes further shaped her sense of family and commitment to peace, communal ideals, and self-discovery. By 1978, she remained dedicated to the gatherings as spiritual recharge points and envisioned them evolving into lasting peace villages, refining the original hippie philosophy into a more sustainable way of life. Chapter 08. D. Sarah. Sunshine. Sarah, born in Toronto in 1949, to a politically active Ukrainian-Canadian family, grew up immersed in leftist traditions, music, and community life, which shaped her early political consciousness and rebellious spirit. As a teenager, she became involved with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Ban the Bomb movement, and Toronto's Bohemian Village scene, later traveling extensively through North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, where she embraced dance, spirituality, psychedelics, and communal living. She danced with a Ukrainian folk ensemble in the Soviet Union, lived in Ibiza, traveled through Greece and Afghanistan, and returned repeatedly to North America, where she discovered her spiritual mother in Isadora Duncan and found a lasting home in the Rainbow Gatherings, where she experienced both conflict and deep communal connections. Her later years focused on motherhood, raising her sons Misha and Sasha on a communal island in British Columbia, continuing her commitment to self-sufficiency, spiritual expression, and the vision of living in harmony with nature and community. Chapter 09. Intro. STP. This is Jody's introduction to the STP family, a group that emerged from the anarchist collective Up Against the Wall, Motherfuckers, in the late 1960s and became one of the streams feeding into the Rainbow Family. Initially active in New York and later in Boulder, members like STP John, Bishop, and Little Brother dealt hallucinogens while opposing heroin and other death drugs, promoting a political stance against narcotics through actions such as their 1969 Off Our Backs poster. The group's culture spread among runaway youth who formed the STP family, bound by shared supplies, protection, and street survival, though marked by heavy drinking and violence. Many members died, were imprisoned, or disappeared by the mid-1970s, while others attempted to settle down, often joining rainbow gatherings as a way of seeking more stability. Despite their turbulent history, STP values of independence and dignity persisted, with later generations at rainbow gatherings adopting those qualities while discarding objectionable practices, blending countercultural resilience with a sense of communal responsibility. Chapter 09. A. Kenny. Freedom. Kenny's account, recorded in 1972, traces his journey from a troubled youth in Virginia Beach, experimenting with drugs and running away, through years of drifting with street families like STP and the LSD family, learning to panhandle, ride freight trains, and live communally in the Sandia Mountains. He recounts his experiences with rainbow gatherings, where he grew disillusioned with what he saw as their phoniness, and his descent into petty crime and heavy drinking before settling into a more stable life with his partner, working as a welder and living in an apartment. Despite this shift, Kenny maintains a deep attachment to the freedom of the road and the identity of being a nomad, reflecting on how street culture has changed, how the revolutionary spirit has given way to cultural shifts, and how STP eventually dissolved as it grew too crowded, but for him, freedom and the open highway remain the central truth. Chapter 09. B. Rufus. Rufus, a Lakota Indian born in 1951 on the Pine Ridge Reservation, grew up between foster care and his grandfather's peyote ceremonies before joining the Army at 17, where he earned medals for bravery in Vietnam, but also faced jail for insubordination. Wounded and disillusioned, he later studied at the University of Texas, engaging in activism with SDS, Yippies, and student government, while witnessing the decline of radical politics and the crackdown on Austin's once tolerant street culture. His sober reflections in 1974 reveal idealism, disappointment in society's burnout, and a desire for meaningful change. While his 1978 drunken account from his bar near Austin shows a hardened man focused on survival, friendships, and business, marked by bitterness toward discrimination, heavy drinking, and the compromises of adulthood. Eventually, he gave up the bar, married, moved to Montana, quit drinking, and after separating, relocated to Tucson. Chapter 09. C. Stray Dog. Stray Dog, born in Golden, Colorado, and raised partly in Australia, recounts his life from being a teenage runaway in Hollywood in 1968, disappointed by the drug culture that replaced the idealized hippie image he had seen in magazines, to joining the STP family in Tucson in 1970. He describes STP's origins in New York City, and laments how it later became a myth distorted by imposters and the deaths or imprisonment of its original members. Though he later settled into steady work and housing, he continued to face police harassment and reflected critically on younger street kids clinging to a bygone hippie era, contrasting their lack of class with the older STP generation. He argued that mass media largely fabricated the hippie myth and that the STP family, while once providing mutual support, was mostly about people partying and looking out for each other. By the 1980s, he distanced himself from drugs, music, and gatherings, preferring stability and pragmatism, and was reported to have died in 1986. Chapter 09. D. Moses. Moses, born in 1925 in Sinaloa, Mexico, grew up in Depression-era California, lost his father young, and took to the road at 14, becoming part of tramp and road culture. He worked at racetracks during World War II, where he first encountered drugs, later joined the circus, married, and raised 6 children who also lived unconventionally. His life involved drug smuggling, time in prison, and connections to counterculture figures such as Allen Ginsberg, Bob Dylan, Abbie Hoffman, and the STP and MDA families. After prison and the loss of his family in Texas, he avoided commercial drug dealing and gravitated toward the Rainbow family, attending gatherings beginning in Granby, Colorado. By the late 1970s, he committed himself fully to the Rainbow family and its itinerant communal lifestyle, traveling with them across the United States until the dissolution of the Rainbow Peace Camp in 1979. Chapter 09. E. Raunchy. Ron. Raunchy Ron, born in Tucson in 1955, recounts a turbulent life shaped by a redneck family background, repeated stints in reform school, an early immersion in the counterculture of Haight-Ashbury and New York's Lower East Side. He became involved with the STP family through initiation rituals and modeled himself after street figures like Frank Motherfucker, embracing a lifestyle of drugs, drinking, and drifting through cities such as Berkeley, Cambridge, and Austin. Ron attended rainbow gatherings, lived through a harsh Vermont winter at Earth People's Park, and experienced both the highs of communal life and the lows of jail, loss, and addiction. He eventually sought stability, working as an apartment maintenance man and settling down with Mary, though they suffered a stillbirth and miscarriages. Disillusioned with street life and panhandling, he came to value having his own home and authority, but by the late 1970s had left Mary, moved to New Mexico, and adopted the name Breaking Wind. Chapter 09. F. Crazy John. The life story of Crazy John, also known as John Buffalo, traces his transformation from a troubled youth raised in a Klan-influenced family to a central figure in the Rainbow family's Shanti Sena security circle. Born in 1950, he rejected formal schooling, gravitated to the Haight-Ashbury scene, and later became deeply involved with countercultural groups like the STP family and the Rainbow family. His life blended violence, drugs, leatherwork, hunting, and outlaw posturing with moments of compassion, feminism, and community building. He endured personal tragedies, including the death of his brother, violent clashes with authorities, and the burning of his cabin by the Bureau of Land Management. Through his role as a Rainbow sheriff, he developed into a peacekeeper, balancing toughness with diplomacy, often confronting his own racism, sexism, and machismo along the way. His story reflects both destructive cycles, addiction, violence, incarceration, and efforts at growth, such as fostering women's spaces, building interracial friendships, and striving for greater consciousness. By the 1980s, despite being shot multiple times, nearly crippled, and imprisoned for LSD possession, he continued to view himself as a protector and symbol of resilience within the Rainbow movement. Chapter 09. G. Bryan. This interview with Bryan, recorded in 1977 and later updated, recounts his turbulent life from his birth in 1955 in Alvin, Texas, through years of hitchhiking, drugs, and street living. After losing his mother at 14 and leaving home on his 15th birthday, Bryan drifted between Houston, California, Florida, and other places, immersing himself in the counterculture, joining the STP group around 1972, and attending events like Washington Smoke-Ins and the 1976 Fiddlers Convention. His life was dominated by heavy drug use, alcoholism, and instability, though he maintained connections with Rainbow family circles. At the time of the interview, he survived by panhandling, union-paid picketing, and temporary shelter, never having paid rent, and he described the physical and mental toll of addiction. A follow-up in 1989 revealed a shift. He was then living with a woman, had a daughter, looked healthier, and drank less, showing a partial recovery from the self-destructive path of his youth. Chapter 09. H. Peanut. Peanut, born in Alaska in 1958, left home at 13 and soon after met Bear of the Rainbow family, with whom she shared years of travels, gatherings, and communal living across the U.S. and Mexico. Her story recounts hitchhiking adventures, early motherhood at 16, and experiences at gatherings in Arkansas, Montana, Oregon, New Mexico, and Guatemala, as well as time spent at communes like Flowering Tree and the Love family. Alongside figures such as Kylo, Marcia, and others, she lived a transient life sustained by trading, communal support, and resistance to authority. In 1979, after returning from Guatemala, Bear died from spinal meningitis, a loss remembered in Phil Coyote's commentary as a painful decline that ended with a communal wake and ceremonies at the Arizona gathering, after which Peanut gave birth to another of Bear's children. Chapter 10. A. Fox.Cosmic. Terms. This interview with Fox, conducted in 1978 at Eden Hot Springs, traces his life from his New Jersey upbringing, his Native American heritage, and his shift from seminary studies to philosophy, psychology, and altered states of consciousness influenced by LSD. After working as a reviewer and counselor in New Jersey, he left for the Southwest, joining the Rainbow family and founding Cottage Industries, a cooperative focused on crafts and forestry work that expanded nationwide. Settling in Arizona, Fox became involved in holistic healing projects at Eden Hot Springs, balancing ideals with the financial demands of running communal land. He described fasting, metaphysical science fiction writing, and communal living, though privately expressed concerns about Eden's management. Carlos, interviewed separately in 1979, criticized Eden's leader Fred for hypocrisy and profiteering, describing unhealthy practices and conflicts over food rules, highlighting tensions between spiritual ideals and practical realities. Chapter 11. Intro.Christ.Family. The Christ family, founded in 1969 by Lightning Amen, who followers regard as Jesus returned, is a counterculture religious order of monks and nuns advocating 3 keys to heaven: no killing, no sex, and no materialism. Members practice strict vegetarianism, avoid physical contact, wear robes instead of pants, and live with minimal possessions, often going barefoot and relying on communal resources. Initially resistant to sharing personal stories, members became more open after hardships and arrests eased, with figures like Saint Stephen and Mother Mary gaining prominence alongside Amen. Over time, the group shifted toward institutionalization, pooling money for communal land in California and Florida, and maintaining vehicles, while relaxing earlier prohibitions such as hymn singing. Though predominantly white and male and treating senior members called archangels with respect, the group maintains loose control and itinerant lifestyles, distinguishing it from stricter cults despite occasional deprogramming attempts like those led by Ted Patrick. Chapter 11. A Star.Bearer. The life story of Starbearer traces his search for meaning through religion, spirituality, and countercultural groups from the 1950s through the late 1970s. Born in Iowa in 1949, he was raised Catholic but drifted into the Bible on his own before rejecting religion during college at UC Irvine after a breakdown and hospitalization. Seeking spiritual answers, he joined and left several groups including the Aquarian Educational Group, Self-Realization Fellowship, Muktananda's Ashram, and the Brotherhood of the Sun, while experiencing visions of Jesus and struggles with the role of gurus. Through his friend Michael, he encountered the Christ family and its founder, Lightning Amen, fascinated by stories linking Amen to mystical signs. Starbearer spent time with communities like Flowering Tree, Rainbow Family, and others, taking the name Starbearer at a rainbow gathering in 1978, later extended to Starbearer. He experimented heavily with psychedelics, peyote rituals, and Native American practices through figures like Mana of the Peyote Way Church and Smiling Eagle, and met Andrew Weil, deepening his interest in spiritual healing. By early 1979, he was living in Tucson, working modest jobs, practicing meditation, and trying to balance his lingering identification with the Christ family with a desire for independence, seeing his life as a mix of spiritual searching, drug-fueled revelations, and efforts to find a community without rigid authority. Chapter 11. B. Clay. Clay, born in 1945 in Rome, New York, to French Canuck and Mohawk heritage, grew up in orphanages after his mother's death, and lived a turbulent life of carnival work, military service in Germany, and prison during the Auburn riot. He later joined the Christ family in 1974, experiencing their strict communal rules under the leadership of Lightning Amen, whom he came to view as manipulative and authoritarian. Though he participated in their campaigns and Rainbow family gatherings, Clay became disillusioned with their control, criminal activities, and hypocrisy, contrasting Lightning Amen's dogmatism with the grounded kindness of rainbows like Jason. Tired of the robe and restrictions, he left the Christ family, embraced independence, and sought his own spiritual path, skeptical of organized religion, but committed to following the Great Spirit within himself while looking ahead to the future. Chapter 11. C. St. Stephen. St. Stephen, born in 1961 in Florida, recounts his troubled childhood, early religious visions, and years of running away before joining the Christ family in 1980, where he embraced their strict spiritual practices of wearing robes, rejecting sex, materialism, and worldly ties. He describes encounters with figures he identifies as biblical or angelic, such as archangels Gabriel and Raphael, John the Baptist, and Jesus, as well as leaders like Lightning Amen, whom he believes to be the Lord God Almighty. His story mixes personal hardships, mystical visions, and a devotion to communal life centered on total spiritual commitment, contrasting the Christ family's discipline with the looser atmosphere of the Rainbow family. He emphasizes that joining the Christ family requires complete dedication, it takes 100%, and reflects on changes within the group, including members eventually wearing pants and permitting sex by the mid-1980s. Chapter 12. A. Moonstone. Moonstone, born in 1946 in Chicago, recounts her journey from a cultured but conflicted family background through dance studies at UCLA, a failed marriage, and her immersion in the counterculture of the late 1960s. She embraced communal living, spiritual exploration, and alternative lifestyles, leaving academia and small-town dance teaching for a nomadic life with the Rainbow family. After meeting her partner Michael Buffalo in 1974, they traveled extensively across the United States, often hitchhiking, living communally, and participating in rainbow gatherings, peyote ceremonies, and intentional communities. They raised children while moving between places such as the Desert House in Arizona, Hopi Land, and the Flowering Tree community in Washington, where they worked the land and built strong communal bonds. Though faced with police raids, internal conflicts, and hardships like poverty and illness, Moonstone emphasized faith, freedom, and the vision of living close to nature in spiritual and communal harmony, continuing this life with Buffalo into the 1990s. Chapter 12. B. Donna. Donna, born in New York City in 1955 to a Reform Jewish family, grew up with a spiritual but non-religious mother and a father who opposed her early drug use. After rejecting college, she moved to Boulder, Colorado, then drifted across the country through communal and countercultural circles, traveling with a Ken Kesey-style bus group, hitchhiking alone, and enduring difficult encounters before reaching Boston and later the West Coast. Drawn into the rainbow gathering scene in the mid-1970s, she became connected with the group that evolved into the Flowering Tree Commune, with whom she shared communal living, gardening, leatherwork, peyote ceremonies, and seasonal migrations between Arizona, Colorado, Washington, and Idaho. Despite displacement when the commune grew too large for its land, Donna and her partner Dennis continued with the community, eventually having a daughter, Chekwala, in 1977, marking a period of personal growth and the easing of her youthful insecurities. Chapter 12. C. Blackjack. Blackjack recounts the journey of a scarf that passed through his life and the lives of others in the Rainbow family, symbolizing the flow of chance, spirit, and interconnectedness. He first acquired it in 1973 while hitchhiking with his friend Red Dog, trading socks for it, and wearing it through intense experiences, including a mistaken police arrest in Oklahoma. The scarf resurfaced at key moments, passing through the hands of friends like Joe, Patty, and Garrick, disappearing and reappearing across places such as Tennessee, Oregon, Santa Cruz, and Tucson. For Blackjack, its recurring presence amid adventures, hardships, and serendipitous reunions represented the kindness of spirit and the miraculous continuity of life's flow. Chapter 12. D. Light Owl. Light Owl, born in Boston in 1953, recounts his journey from suburban Catholic childhood through early drug use, college years at Evergreen State studying political science, anthropology, and archaeology, and eventual disillusionment with school, leading him to communal living and the Rainbow family gatherings. After participating in biodynamic farming, he began traveling extensively, attending healing and rainbow gatherings across Washington, Montana, Arizona, New Mexico, and beyond, encountering figures like Pukulani, Antoinette No Guns, Skeeter, and Grandfather David. At one Curlew healing gathering, he embraced the name Light Owl after a dramatic confrontation with a man he perceived as practicing black medicine, invoking light and openly establishing his spiritual identity. His travels included encounters with peyote ceremonies, Native American rituals such as the sun dance, and numerous acts of spiritual exchange, hitchhiking, and communal living. Settling for periods at Flowering Tree, he lived in a teepee, helped with fruit-picking camps and gatherings, and shared in collective spiritual visions, including prophetic dreams about purification and sacred places. His narrative reflects a life rooted in countercultural spirituality, itinerancy, and the search for light against darkness. Chapter 12. Earthy Gypsy. This is an autobiographical account by Ba, born Barbara in 1950, who became deeply involved in communal and countercultural living after leaving college in Colorado during the late 1960s. Influenced by psychedelics, spiritual exploration, and the ideals of the flower child era, she embraced life in communes, teepees, and the rainbow gatherings, guided by visions of unity, nature, and shared humanity. Her life with her partner Jeff revolved around self-sufficiency, raising herbs, crops, and horses, tanning hides, and living without electricity while raising their child, Antali. She describes transformative encounters with spiritual figures such as Joy Sun, experiences of jealousy and purification, and her ongoing connection to native traditions and practices like cradleboards and chanting. Rooted in a philosophy of living through love rather than commerce, Ba and her extended Flowering Tree family embodied a lifestyle seen as too earthy, too gypsy for mainstream expectations, continually moving with the flow of life and community. Chapter 12. Sky Pony. This story recounts the childhood experiences of Sky Pony, a 9-year-old who grew up in the countercultural Rainbow family community, taking on a new name and embracing a life close to nature at Flowering Tree Farm. Born in Oakland in 1969 to a young mother, he spent years traveling before joining communal life, preferring teepee living, candlelight, and self-sufficiency over conventional comforts like electricity or television. He describes his schooling, from public school to free school and homeschooling, his enjoyment of riding ponies, tanning hides, and helping with chores such as gardening, hauling firewood, and fetching water with his dog. Sky Pony shares impressions of spirituality, knowing little of mainstream religion but hearing about figures like Noah and Krishna, as well as witnessing births in the community. He recalls gatherings, learning guitar from a friend named Blackjack, and reading stories to younger children, while reflecting on an uncertain future but imagining himself one day becoming a horse trainer. Chapter 13. Intro.Austin.coop. The Austin Rainbow Co-op House emerged in 1977 when Rose, a wealthy Rainbow sister, financed a building to provide food and shelter for Austin's large street community, which had long been supported by the city's permissive panhandling laws, mild climate, proximity to Mexico, and the University of Texas's left-wing scene. The house was sustained by residents' wages, street flower sales, donations, and dumpster runs, while Red River Women's Press, linked to the industrial workers of the world, helped promote it. Its location near the state mental hospital led many discharged patients to stay there, sparking neighborhood complaints and constant police surveillance. In March 1978, after a resident known as Teddy Bear shot and killed Larry Smith inside the house, negative press mounted, though the house stayed open until summer 1978, when members left for the Oregon Rainbow Gathering. Chapter 13. Richard.Eagle.Feather. This is an interview-based life story of Richard Eaglefeather, central to the founding of the Rainbow House in Austin in the 1970s. Born in 1948 near Kansas City and raised in Louisiana and Texas, Richard described his early life in sports, work in oil fields, and eventual disillusionment with mainstream institutions like college, the Job Corps, and teaching. After experiencing spiritual awakenings through travel, Hindu philosophy, psychedelics, and communal living, he became deeply involved in the Rainbow family gatherings, starting with Utah in 1974. He recalled moments of unity, conflict, healing work, and encounters with both support and hostility. With Michelle, he helped establish communal kitchens, massage therapy practices, and later the Austin Rainbow Co-op House, a free space offering food and shelter to the homeless and marginalized. The house, funded by donations and bulk food collection, faced opposition from authorities but was known internationally before closing in 1978. Richard reflected on the spiritual intensity of those years, the struggles against critics and bureaucrats, and his commitment to service through prayer, healing, and communal living. Chapter 13. B. Michelle. Michelle, born in Bakersfield and raised in Tulsa, left school after 9th grade and went on the road at age 15 in 1971. She discovered the Rainbow Gatherings in 1976 in Montana, where she felt a deep sense of love and healing, which became central to her life. By 1978, she was living in Austin, involved with the Austin Communications Co-op that provided food and shelter, seeing its work as spiritual preparation for a greater revelation of Christ within all people. She described how the co-op house emerged unexpectedly while she and her partner Richard were hitchhiking, becoming a space for community and connection leading into the 1978 gathering. Michelle had recently earned her GED and expressed a desire to keep learning practical skills. She and Richard had a son named Omnima before the 1979 Arizona gathering, but separated afterward. Richard continued bringing their son to gatherings, while Michelle remained involved and later lived with Happy Jack, with whom she had 2 more children, Ashley and Acton. Chapter 13. See Rose. This memoir of Rose recounts her life from her privileged Jewish upbringing in 1920s, New York, through decades of radical political involvement, personal struggles, and immersion in the counterculture, highlighting her time at Highlander School, encounters with labor and civil rights activism, and later exploration of sexual liberation, motherhood, divorce, and tragedy, including the loss of a daughter and the disappearance of a son. She describes years abroad in Rome, brushes with teaching, writing, and radical publishing, then her turn toward drugs, free love, and spiritual seeking. From the 1970s onward, she became deeply entangled with the Rainbow family, sustaining relationships with figures like Richard, David Beckwith, and Nick, financing communal projects such as the Rainbow House in Austin, and enduring health crises including cancer and sexually transmitted diseases. Her narrative portrays an adventurous, tumultuous life shaped by wealth, loss, and persistent searching for meaning within radical politics, alternative communities, and gatherings. Chapter 13. Gypsy. This memoir of Gypsy Tex recounts his journey from a troubled youth in South Carolina through military service in Vietnam, where he underwent political and personal transformations shaped by encounters with fellow soldiers, drugs, and disillusionment. After repeated tours in Vietnam and the death of his close friend Gary, he deserted the Air Force and became deeply involved in radical anti-war activism, including the Quaker Peace Vigil and the militant May Day protests in Washington, D.C. His life intersected with figures like Janis Joplin, and he immersed himself in the countercultural circuit of concerts, collectives, and demonstrations. Through relationships with women like Donna and friends in rainbow circles, he sought community in communes, gatherings, and alternative lifestyles, eventually finding solace in the Rainbow Family Gathering of 1977. Despite betrayals, hardships, and periods of militant resistance, his narrative closes with his enduring desire to live simply as a hippie dope farmer in the western countryside. Chapter 13. David Earl. David Earl, born in Florida in 1956, recounts a restless youth marked by hitchhiking, commune living, odd jobs, relationships, brushes with the law, and deep struggles with loneliness, mistrust, and theft, which he came to see as karmic lessons. His travels took him across the United States, from Florida, Illinois, and New York to Colorado, Texas, and Oregon, with transformative experiences at music festivals, rainbow gatherings, and in the hippie town of Takelma. Along the way he battled personal demons, a failed engagement, a turbulent marriage to Kathy, and the loss of his mother, while gradually moving from a lifestyle of stealing and drifting to one of self-reflection and community participation. A turning point came when he joined the Rainbow family in Austin, where washing dishes and engaging in open discussions shifted his perspective on responsibility, love, and spirituality. He came to see Rainbow as a living expression of biblical prophecy, emphasizing unity and shared energy, and found a sense of true belonging and healing he had long sought. Chapter 13. F. Rainbow House. The Rainbow House story recounts how a communal residence at 3406 Guadalupe in Austin, known as the Rainbow House, came under scrutiny in 1978, after police and reporters described it as overcrowded and unsanitary. With 30 to 40 people living in makeshift conditions and additional residents in a garage, prompting city inspectors to cite code violations and the Building Standards Commission to hold hearings on occupancy reduction or closure. Police suspected the house was used as a refuge for runaways and drug users, while neighbors condemned the residents as disruptive street people. The property was owned by Houston executive Ben H. Powell and rented by Richard Bailey, who viewed the eventual city order limiting residents to 20 as a partial victory compared to calls for immediate closure. Later hearings extended the occupancy variance but warned the residents that overcrowding remained a problem, reflecting the tension between official regulation, neighborhood opposition, and the community's role in providing shelter for hungry and homeless people. Chapter 13. G. Harmony. Harmony, born in Ottumwa, Iowa in 1942, recounts a life shaped by family tragedy, poverty, and eventual spiritual searching. After a strict religious upbringing in what is almost certainly Hinsdale, Illinois, he pursued ministerial studies but shifted into sales and later broadcasting. His marriage ended in divorce in 1971, leading him into motorcycles, marijuana, and psychedelic experimentation. Drawn by ideals of peace and love, he attended his first Rainbow Gathering in 1977, finding freedom and community. Soon after, he joined the Austin Communications Co-op, a Rainbow family offshoot supported by communal funds and guided by shared responsibility. There, tensions arose, including a violent episode when a member named Teddy Bear shot Larry Smith amid disputes and racial undercurrents, but Harmony sought to calm conflicts rather than inflame them. For him, the Rainbow House embodied both struggle and possibility, a collective experiment in love, survival, and spiritual community, fragile but worth pursuing even if temporary. Chapter 13. H. Bablingbrook. Elizabeth Bablingbrook recounts a life shaped by hardship, resilience, and transformation, beginning with a fragile infancy in Missouri in 1930, through a strict but stable upbringing in Arkansas during the Depression and World War II, and into a series of marriages, motherhood, and personal reinvention. She describes her devout church life, her role as a Sunday school teacher, and the challenges of divorce and remarriage, ultimately moving to Austin in 1972, where her life intersected with countercultural currents, including marijuana use and later involvement with the Rainbow House community. Despite arrests, separations, and financial struggles, she embraced a fluid identity, rejecting leadership roles but embracing her role as a connector, remembering countless names and treating the Rainbow House residents as her children, framing her journey as a series of phases and scenes in a larger unfolding story. Chapter 13. I. Eliza. Eliza, born in 1963 in Arlington, Texas, grew up in a turbulent household marked by her mother's substance abuse, multiple marriages, and frequent moves across Texas, Ohio, and Oklahoma. Her older brother John introduced her and even their mother to drugs, leading to early exposure to marijuana, LSD, and speed, while her mother's relationships often brought instability and violence. By age 8, Eliza was using drugs regularly with her best friend Dee, and as a teenager she witnessed repeated arrests, fights, and busts, including her own juvenile detention after a juvenile sting in Austin. Despite periods of chaos, she found community through parties, free schools, and eventually the Rainbow family, meeting Harmony and living at the Rainbow House in Austin before traveling cross-country with others to rainbow gatherings. Though her relationship with Harmony faded, she expressed a longing for stability, envisioning a future of raising children and living simply, while acknowledging that her life was still wide open with so much still to get into. Chapter 14. Preface. Oklahoma. This preface describes how Oklahoma became a hub for rainbow family activity, noting its location on Interstate 40 and nearby sympathetic communities such as Norman's student population and older allies like Jane Howe. While rainbow members had long traveled through Oklahoma, a more defined community formed in Stillwater near Oklahoma State University after a caravan from the 1975 Arkansas gathering arrived. Oro, a woman who started OM Cooking, provided jobs and a gathering place for rainbow people, turning the restaurant and its nearby apartment into a central hub until her departure in 1975. The original camp at Lake Carl Blackwell dissolved, with some members leaving and others settling in Stillwater or Coyle. By 1990, most rainbow people had left the Stillwater area except for the Paradise Valley community near Coyle, though smaller groups were emerging in Norman and Tahlequah. Chapter 14. Jane Howe. Jane Howe, born in 1915, became a central figure in Norman, Oklahoma's transient youth scene when she opened her home as a crash pad from 1969 to 1972, ultimately hosting more than 600 young travelers. Inspired by the counterculture in songs like She's Leaving Home, she provided food, shelter, and safety while maintaining strict rules against drugs, focusing on love and protection rather than politics. Word of her generosity spread widely, drawing hitchhikers from across the country and even police referrals, and she witnessed firsthand the struggles of runaways and the abuse many endured. Although she distanced herself from direct activism, she saw music as the true binding force of the movement, and she recognized the long-term social changes that emerged, such as crisis centers and daycare facilities. When her crash pad abruptly closed in 1972, she described the experience as a chunk out of time, shortly before the first rainbow gathering took place in Colorado. Chapter 14. Oro. This recounts Oro's efforts in the early 1960s to establish a Woody Guthrie Memorial Room in the Okemah, Oklahoma Library, a proposal largely resisted by townspeople wary of Guthrie's leftist sympathies, though she gained support from her friend, retired teacher Layla Chowning. Oro recalls the town's reluctance and the contrast with travelers and hippies, who came seeking Guthrie's legacy, writing messages on the walls of his abandoned farmhouse. Walt Perel, a Vietnam veteran influenced by Guthrie's songs, describes his 1975 visit to the house, emphasizing its spiritual atmosphere and authenticity as a monument, despite vandalism and decay. Subsequent notes and poems copied by Oro, Walt, and Jody Bateman document visitors' tributes from the 1970s, expressing admiration, solidarity, and inspiration drawn from Guthrie, including messages from fans, musicians, and even Guthrie's family. Collectively, these memories illustrate the tension between local indifference and broader cultural reverence for Guthrie as a symbol of the people, culminating in the recognition of his house as a pilgrimage site before its eventual demolition. Chapter 14. See Daniel. Daniel, the son of Oro, recounted his unconventional childhood marked by frequent moves after his parents' divorce, including time in Oklahoma, California, Florida, Alaska, and Canada. Born in 1963, he described early interests in fantasy writing and designing complex spaceships, though he eventually rejected unrealistic designs. His education was irregular, as he often skipped school, which led to legal disputes with his father, custody battles, and even a brief foster placement before running away with his sister. His mother operated a vegetarian restaurant in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and associated with the Rainbow family, which brought buses to their property. Daniel later lived in Dawson City, Yukon, in a small cabin, learned skiing and snowmobiling, and attended rainbow gatherings in New Mexico, Oregon, and beyond, finding spiritual energy and community there. Later notes mention that he bicycled from Alaska to Arizona for the 1979 gathering, graduated from a special high school in Alaska in 1981, and that his mother spent significant time involved in a holistic healing center in Hawaii. Chapter 14. Sarah. This life story of Sarah Windfire recounts her upbringing in a troubled Jewish family in Connecticut, her father's charm and instability, and her struggles with insecurity that led her into drugs, unstable relationships, and extensive travels. She lived with musicians, gay friends, and lovers, journeyed across the United States and Europe, hitchhiking and experimenting with alternative lifestyles, before finding a sense of belonging at the 1975 Arkansas Rainbow Gathering. There she became involved in the Rainbow family, eventually partnering with Scotter, with whom she conceived a child, Jesse, and shared a deep though sometimes strained bond shaped by communal living, peyote ceremonies, and creative projects like building a gypsy wagon. Her life shifted dramatically with motherhood as she moved between rainbow gatherings, kitchens, and small-town life in Oklahoma, balancing her love of movement and community with the demands of family. She reflects on her growth from insecurity to having definite goals, her wish for a self-sufficient home, and her sense of having a sweet life despite hardships. Chapter 14. Scotter. Scotter, born in Atlanta in 1951, recounts a turbulent life shaped by conflict with his parents, early rebellion, and immersion in countercultural movements. After high school, he drifted through Alaska, California, and across the U.S., embracing music, drugs, and the hippie lifestyle, while struggling with illness, relationships, and self-identity. His experiences included hitchhiking to festivals, working odd jobs, joining communal groups like the Maggot family, and engaging with the Rainbow Gatherings, where he found both liberation and disillusionment. Relationships with women, particularly Patty and later Sarah, deeply influenced his path, leading to the birth of his son Jesse in 1976, marriage, and attempts to build a family while moving through communes and spiritual experiments. Though plagued by insecurity and emotional strain, Scotter reflects that life with Sarah and Jesse pushed him to confront his fears, grow more grounded in material responsibilities, and work toward keeping our thing going, even as the idealism of his early countercultural journeys gave way to harder realities. Chapter 14. Mike Dotz. Mike S., born in Purcell, Oklahoma in 1955, grew up in a turbulent family environment marked by his mother's literary ambitions, her accidental death at the hands of his father, and the resulting murder charges that divided the family, leading him into heavy drinking, fights, and criminal behavior during his youth. Despite struggles, he worked various jobs across the U.S., from selling vacuum cleaners in Seattle to logging in Snohomish Valley and later working for the railroad, before enrolling at Oklahoma State University in 1975. His life took a spiritual turn after meeting Rainbow family members, particularly a man named Sakra, who introduced him to God, and he became deeply influenced by experiences of community and spirituality at Rainbow gatherings in Montana and New Mexico. These encounters reshaped his outlook, blending faith, spirituality, and fellowship. Professionally, Mike built a stable career as a project supervisor with Environmental and Structural Projects Incorporated in Oklahoma City, specializing in concrete and landscaping, where he worked alongside childhood acquaintances from Purcell, while still carrying the influence of the Rainbow family into his later life. Chapter 14. Matt and Maureen, 1. This segment recounts the intertwined life stories of Matt and Maureen, drawn from interviews and letters collected in the late 1970s. Matt, born in 1958 in Kansas, grew up amid family instability and struggled with identity, drugs, and disillusionment with school and society. His experiences ranged from underground publishing and military school punishment to hitchhiking, factory work, and survival through odd jobs and leatherwork. A pivotal moment came at the 1977 Rainbow Gathering in New Mexico, where he embraced communal ideals and met Maureen, whom he recognized as a spiritual partner. Maureen, born in 1948 in Ohio, left home for college and work, but grew restless with conventional expectations, experiencing factory labor exploitation, countercultural movements in Miami, and traveling through concerts and communes before pursuing independence, music, and communal living. Both describe turning away from materialism and embracing community, self-sufficiency, and love as guiding principles, with the Rainbow Gathering marking the point where their lives converged in shared purpose. Chapter 14. Matt. And Maureen 2. This segment recounts Maureen's search for belonging and her eventual bond with Matt during the Rainbow Gathering in New Mexico, leading them to travel together across the western United States with their dog Casey. Along the way they camped in national parks, visited sacred sites, and lived frugally, often surviving on discarded food and makeshift income from leatherwork. Maureen discovered she was pregnant despite a gynecologist's earlier misdiagnosis, and the couple eventually settled for a time in Oregon, relying on welfare and odd jobs. Their differences with family became apparent, particularly with Matt's father, who rejected his unconventional lifestyle. Seeking a supportive community, they turned to the farm in Tennessee, where their son Saliu was born on the winter solstice in 1977, though Matt found the commune's culture hypocritical and restrictive. They later moved to Miami with other farm members, where Matt struggled to support the family through craft work, while tensions in the relationship grew. By early 1978, Matt and Maureen had separated, with Maureen focusing on raising Selu in a shared household and planning to become a teacher, while Matt sought meaningful moral work and spiritual growth on the road. Both continued to participate in Rainbow Gatherings, though Matt eventually resettled in Oklahoma, where he became involved with the Cherokee community and activist movements. Chapter 15. Henry the Fiddler. Henry the Fiddler, born in Chicago in 1949, grew up in a politically radical family and studied piano and violin before turning to computers and later the Army, where his parents' communist ties blocked his advancement. After leaving the service in 1970, he drifted through jobs before immersing himself in Chicago's counterculture, where music and activism reshaped his outlook. A transformative moment came during the 1971 May Day demonstrations in Washington, D.C., where he earned the name Henry the Fiddler and even performed with Pete Seeger. Leaving conventional work, he busked across the U.S. hitchhiking tens of thousands of miles, winning fiddle contests and joining the Rainbow Gathering culture. Though he attempted a touring career and recorded a live album, financial struggles led him to settle in Boulder by 1979, where he returned to computer programming while focusing on networking for the Rainbow family. Henry's later efforts centered on building decentralized communication systems, like the Rainbow Networkers Tribe and newsletters, to strengthen connections among far-flung members, balancing his dual identity as both musician and organizer, blending countercultural ideals with a turn toward conservative survivalist thinking. Chapter 15. Birdie. This narrative recounts the life of Elizabeth Ann Birdie Guzman, born in 1958 in Worcester, Massachusetts, who became immersed in the Rainbow family after hitchhiking to the 1975 gathering in Arkansas. She traveled extensively with the Rainbow and STP families, forming bonds with people such as Chuck Winsong, Tony Angel, and her brother Cracker Jack, and experiencing adventures from Mexico to Alaska. Birdie describes mystical experiences, communal living, and hardships, including her stormy relationship with Tony, her tattoo initiation, and the mysterious loss of the Stone of Many Faces, later contextualized by Garrick as linked to Hopi traditions and Black Mesa resistance. Eventually, Birdie settled in Massachusetts with her childhood sweetheart Biff, raised 7 children on a farm in Maine, and briefly returned to gatherings in 1990, 1991, and 2008. Reflecting on her journey, she emphasizes the Rainbow Gathering's enduring role in opening hearts and inspiring new generations to step outside conventional life. Chapter 15. C. Scott. Scott, born in Williamsport, Pennsylvania in 1961, recounts a turbulent life of drugs, drinking, and drifting through odd jobs before settling into the Rainbow family's community house in Tucson in 1983, where he found purpose helping others off the street. After rejecting criminal initiation into a biker gang and struggling with alcoholism and factory work, he moved west, ultimately joining Community House through founder Daniel Forwins. There, he took on carpentry, recycling cardboard, working at the food bank, and participating in rainbow gatherings, describing both the hardships of transience and the joy of communal living. Scott reflects on his past drug use, his volunteer work, and the turnover of residents at Community House, emphasizing his shift from taking to giving back, and noting that while the house eventually dissolved, it gave him a chance to learn, contribute, and live differently. Chapter 15. D. Spring Flower. Spring Flower's life story recounts her journey from a neglected and abused childhood in New York to her search for belonging in the counterculture and rainbow family of living light. Drawn early to visions of peace, love, and communal life, she ran away as a teenager, became involved in the anti-war movement, and encountered communes, hitchhiking adventures, and the hardships of unstable relationships, drug use, and poverty. Despite cycles of trauma, abusive partners, and deep depression, including repeated suicidal struggles, she found healing and acceptance at rainbow gatherings, where collective care and spiritual connection gave her a sense of family and purpose. By the 1980s, she had children, endured further abuse, but also rediscovered resilience through education, activism, and the rainbow community's support. Her testimony closes with a call for a permanent rainbow healing center, emphasizing the need for safe, non-judgmental spaces where emotionally wounded individuals can find compassion, healing, and love outside mainstream society. Chapter 15. E. Jackson. Unicorn 1. Jackson Unicorn, Jack, recounts his life from his birth in 1942, through his immersion in the 1960s counterculture, moving from Greenwich Village's coffeehouse music scene to Haight-Ashbury, Denver's Family Dog Concert Hall, and later Colorado gatherings that helped form the Rainbow Family of Living Light. He recalls meeting figures like Don Kelsey, who inspired the 1968 Gathering of the Tribes at Sugarloaf Mountain, and his interactions with groups like the STP family, Barry and Fantuzzi. His story traces the transition from early hippie ideals to the tragedies of drug overdoses and deaths within the community, his involvement with the Jarre Fellowship in Los Angeles and Boulder, and the explosive growth of the Rainbow Family alongside spiritual experiments with Mechu Sama and Guru Maharaji. By the early 1970s, Jack and his wife Nina helped organize community gardens, healing fellowships, and lived through the dramatic expansion of the Rainbow movement, which intertwined spirituality, music, communal living, and resistance to mainstream culture. Chapter 15. F. Jackson. Unicorn 2. This narrative recounts Jackson's spiritual and communal journey from the mid-1970s to early 1990s, beginning with his shift from the Jarre Fellowship to Swami Muktananda, which led to personal upheaval, homelessness, and a new life in teepees and traveling communities. He formed bonds with Rainbow Family members, lived in Mexico and Austin, and experienced psychedelic mushroom rituals that culminated in a UFO encounter witnessed by others, reinforcing his belief in spiritual transformation and cosmic guidance. His path included time at ashrams, attempts to help found intentional communities in Colorado, and deep relationships with women such as Valerie, Ravana, and later Willow, with whom he built family life and music. Encounters with spiritual teachers like Muktananda and Dadaji shaped his rejection of guru-centered hierarchies, aligning him with rainbow ideals of non-institutional spirituality. After years of transience, he found renewed belonging at the rainbow gatherings of the late 1980s and early 1990s, culminating in a settled family life, ongoing musical creativity, and participation in a rainbow community in Iowa City. Chapter 16. A. Jody. Life. Story 1. This memoir recounts the life of Jody Bateman, born in Duncan, Oklahoma in 1942, tracing his journey from a childhood shaped by family tensions, church-going grandparents, and early struggles with coordination, to becoming deeply involved in the civil rights and peace movements of the 1960s. After college beginnings at Westminster and Oklahoma University, he was drawn into activism through encounters with pacifists and demonstrations in Chicago, eventually joining the Student Peace Union, Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, and the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project. His experiences included work with freedom libraries, participation in protests at the 1964 Democratic National Convention, and extended time living among black families in Marks, Mississippi, where he witnessed systemic oppression, forged bonds with community leaders such as the Franklin family, and endured arrests for civil rights actions. Alongside his brother Jack, he became enmeshed in the counterculture through folk music, political organizing, and early exposure to marijuana and LSD, all while maintaining a commitment to social justice. His story illustrates the intertwining of personal growth, political radicalization, and the tumultuous shifts of mid-20th century America. Chapter 16. B. Jody. Life. Story 2. Jody Bateman's memoir recounts his journey from the civil rights movement in Mississippi, through decades of activism, underground press work, and deep involvement in the Rainbow family. He describes the struggle in Quitman County to ensure impoverished women could lead Head Start centers, the March Against Fear, and his friendship with fellow activist Alex Shimkin, whose later disappearance in Vietnam deeply affected him. After Mississippi, Bateman became active in the anti-war movement, publishing underground newspapers and facing police harassment, including a raid and false charges in Lawton, Oklahoma. He then gravitated toward the Rainbow Gatherings, beginning in 1975, which profoundly shaped his life and personal transformation, teaching him practical skills, community values, and a sense of belonging. Alongside this, he continued collecting oral histories from both Rainbow participants and Black Mississippians, though tragically one major manuscript was lost in a flood. Later years brought companionship with Summer Breeze in New Mexico, academic work, translations, and teaching, until her death in 2014. In reflecting on his long journey, Bateman connects the Rainbow ethos with contemporary politics, seeing it as a grassroots counterbalance to social and political decay, offering an inclusive vision of environmentalism, racial justice, and community solidarity.